He was hired to sell a forgotten house by the creek, rotting beams, leaking roof, and a reputation so bad the town called it not worth the taxes. Ben Hayes, a seasoned realtor with a lonely heart, thought it was just another doomed property he'd have to offload quietly. But beneath the warped kitchen floorboards, his loyal German Shepherd uncovered something unimaginable: a sealed chamber hiding war bonds, century-old lumber shares, and a legal deed worth tens of millions, tied to a lost fund meant for widows and orphans of the old timber workers. What began as a thankless assignment became a battle for justice, a revival of a forgotten community, and the unexpected spark of love between two souls who had spent years in quiet sorrow. Before the story unfolds, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and tell us, where in the world are you watching from? A thin autumn rain sifted across the quiet Vermont valley, soft as breath against the darkening pines. Benjamin Ben Hayes eased his dark sedan onto the gravel shoulder and cut the engine. He sat still for a moment, listening to the light hiss of rain on the windshield, the way some men listen to music. At 60, tall and lean with salt and pepper hair, combed carefully to the side, and a closely trimmed stubble that did little to soften the angles of his weathered jaw, Ben had mastered the art of stillness. It was a stillness born not of peace, but of endurance, something carved into him after the long illness and quiet departure of his wife 3 years earlier. He had been a wealthy man long before grief came, but the wealth had never felt heavier than it did when he carried it alone. Rex shifted in the passenger seat, tail sweeping once across the leather. The German Shepherd, 6 years old, strong-boned, black and tan with a slightly torn right ear, had the calm, intelligent eyes of an animal who had once served a rescue unit and never forgot it. He sensed the tremors in Ben's silence long before Ben understood them himself. When Ben finally exhaled, Rex nudged his arm as if signaling, "Let's go. The world is still waiting for you." Ben opened the door, stepped out, and breathed in the smell of wet leaves and cold stone. Before him loomed Honeysuckle Creek House, the property he had been hired, quietly, reluctantly, to evaluate and eventually sell. The 3-story timber and stone mansion sat slanted against the rise of the hill like an old general leaning on a cane. The once white shutters were peeling to gray, and honeysuckle vines had grown wild, gripping the porch columns in twisting, half-strangling embraces. A narrow creek zigzagged behind it, its voice restless beneath the rain. He pulled his coat tighter. The case was peculiar. The owner's descendants wanted nothing to do with it. The county appraised it incorrectly for years due to tax exemptions that no one understood. Locals whispered the place wasn't worth the paperwork, whatever that meant. But wealthy clients trusted Ben because he managed the impossible. He sold houses even when they came with ghosts, real or imagined. "Come on, boy," he murmured. Rex trotted ahead, toes soundless on the wet porch. Ben followed with a flashlight and a folder of documents tucked beneath his arm, files from the county, a decades-old property deed, and an inventory list so inconsistent it looked like someone had typed parts of it in the dark. Inside, dust motes drifted through the cold air like tiny defeated soldiers. The foyer still carried hints of cedar polish beneath the must, and the chandelier overhead, missing 3 bulbs, hung crookedly, its crystals dull. Ben studied the walls with the eye of a man who had spent 40 years evaluating estates, reading the language of wood, weight, and time. Something felt incomplete, as if the house itself were withholding a sentence. He shook off the thought. He had work to do. But before he could even start the first photo documentation, his phone buzzed. A message from the town clerk. "Don't forget meeting tonight. Lang pushing proposal again." He sighed. Philip Lang, tall, broad-shouldered, mid-50s, with dark hair shot through with gray, and the kind of sculpted jaw that came from a lifetime of believing he was always right, was one of those investors who wore ambition like fragrance. Sharp-eyed, impeccably dressed, and convinced that any untouched land was a wasted opportunity. His latest fixation, turning the entire Honeysuckle Creek area into a luxury resort. Ben pocketed the phone. "Not today, Philip," he muttered. Rex's ears flipped back, alert. The dog padded toward the kitchen, nose quivering. Ben clicked on his flashlight and followed, the floorboards sighing beneath his weight. The kitchen was a gloomy cavern of rusted hinges and cracked tiles, but it held a strange gravity, as though stories clung to the cold walls. Rex suddenly bristled, not in fear, but in curiosity. "What is it?" Ben asked softly. Before the dog could answer in his own silent language, a noise from outside, a sharp splash, cut through the rain. Ben rushed to the back door and stepped into the wet dusk. At the bottom of the sloping backyard, near the footbridge over the creek, a woman bent over a collapsing cardboard box, clutching at its soggy sides as books spilled into the rushing water. She was slender, perhaps late 50s, wrapped in a gray cardigan that clung darkly to her shoulders in the rain. Her light brown hair, threaded with elegant strokes of silver, was tied loosely at the nape of her neck. She wore no makeup. Her skin, pale and lightly freckled, glowed with the softness of a person who had spent a lifetime in the company of stories rather than mirrors. Her movements were brisk yet gentle, the movements of someone who cared deeply and quietly for things the world rarely noticed. "Nora Whitman," Ben whispered, recognizing her from the library inscription on the box. He hurried toward her, but Rex reached first, plunging through the shallow water and grabbing the edge of the sagging box with his jaws, carefully, almost tenderly, dragging it to higher ground. The woman straightened, eyes widening in surprise. "Oh, that dog is a miracle!" Her voice was warm, textured like old parchment and tea steam. She looked up at Ben, rain streaking across her cheeks. She wasn't beautiful in the polished, metropolitan way Ben often saw at gala events. No, she was lovely in a slower, steadier way, like the last light of autumn through a window. "I'm sorry," Ben said, breathless. "I saw you struggling. You and your heroic dog," she said, smiling. A small, embarrassed smile, soft at the edges, shy in the middle. "These are book donations. I promised the seniors reading club I'd bring them tonight, but the bottom fell out of the box." She glanced toward Rex, who was now sitting proudly beside his salvage. "How old is he?" 6, Ben said. "Rex used to be a rescue dog. He has a way of noticing things." She nodded slowly. "Some creatures hear what we don't." For a moment, neither moved. Rain pattered on the creek, wind rustled the brittle branches. There was a strange, delicate hush in the air, as if time were gently watching them. Ben cleared his throat. "I'm Ben Hayes." "I know," she replied. "You're the man trying to save Honeysuckle Creek House, or sell it. I suppose those two things fight in you, don't they?" He didn't answer. Her intuition startled him. Nora knelt to gather the last of the books, her fingers graceful but chilled. Ben crouched to help. Their hands brushed once, briefly, unexpectedly, and something in her eyes flickered like a lantern in fog. But whatever tender moment might have followed was cut short by the distant sound of car tires grinding up gravel, the unwelcome growl of ambition approaching. Ben turned to see Philip Lang stepping out of a sleek black SUV, umbrella unfurled, suit immaculate despite the rain. "Evening, Hayes," Philip called, voice smooth as polished stone. His steel-gray eyes flicked toward Nora with only a polite nod before fastening back on Ben. "We need to talk. The town council meets in an hour, and they're ready to vote." Ben swallowed a sigh. "Philip, can it wait?" "No," Philip replied. "You either help the town move forward, or you cling to sentimental rot." His smile was thin, a blade hidden in charm. "And I'd hate for you to be on the wrong side of history." Rex growled low, quiet but unmistakable. Philip's smile twitched. "Control your animal." Ben straightened. "He just dislikes dishonesty." Philip's jaw tightened before he turned on his heel and walked back to his SUV. Rain ate the silence. Nora watched Philip leave. "He won't stop," she murmured. "No," Ben said. "He won't." Rex nudged Ben's leg again, urgent this time. The dog trotted to the porch, pawing at the old boards, nose pressed to a narrow seam in the floor, as if something beneath the wood whispered his name. Ben frowned. "Rex, what are you—" The board shifted under Rex's weight with a hollow groan. Nora's eyes widened. "Is that—" Ben knelt, pressed the wood gently, and felt the faintest give beneath his fingertips. A breath of stale, cold air drifted upward from the seam, air untouched for years. Rex stepped back, golden eyes gleaming with an intensity that prickled Ben's spine. "Ben," Nora whispered, "there's something under the kitchen floor." And just as Ben reached for his flashlight again, just as the breath of hidden air sighed against his palm, the porch light flickered once, then went out completely. Darkness swallowed the house. The darkness that swallowed the house seemed almost deliberate, as though the old mansion had waited decades for the moment to pull its secrets shut around itself. Ben Hayes stood still on the creaking porch, his breath suspended in the cold air. Next to him, Nora Whitman steadied her wet cardigan around her shoulders while her eyes adjusted to the sudden blackness. Rex pressed close to Ben's leg, body taut, ears pricked toward the seam in the floor he had discovered moments before. The faint draft rising through the woodboards whispered something too old to name. Ben clicked his flashlight on again. Its narrow cone cut through the dark like a blade. "If there's a subfloor cavity," he murmured, "the main entry must have been sealed decades back." Nora nodded, watching him with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. She was a woman shaped by quiet study and gentle habit, but there was a spark of fearlessness in her that surprised him, a resolve polished by years of taking responsibility for things others dismissed. The rain outside softened, leaving a damp hush clinging to the windows. He wedged his fingers under the warped board. Rex pawed once beside him as if guiding his grip. With a heavy groan, the board lifted, revealing a square opening and a ladder descending into shadow. Old air drifted upward, cold, wooden, faintly metallic. Nora drew a slow breath. Whatever is down there, it hasn't seen daylight in years. "Maybe 50, Ben said. "Maybe more." "Do we go?" she asked. Ben hesitated, but Rex answered for him, slipping into the opening with surprising agility, nails tapping softly on the ladder rungs as he climbed down into the dark. Ben swore under his breath. "Well," he said, "that settles it." He motioned Nora behind him. "Stay close." She nodded once, swallowing her nerves. Her silhouette in the flashlight glow looked unexpectedly brave. The ladder descended into a narrow chamber barely taller than Ben's shoulders. The brick walls glistened with moisture, as though the hovel had been sweating for years. The floor, covered in a thin skin of dust, bore no footprints. Nothing living had entered recently. Rex waited in the center, tail low, but wagging slightly. Nose pointed toward a section of wall where one brick jutted unevenly. Ben swept his light along the bricks. Loose masonry. He tugged. The brick slid out easily, followed by another. Dust coughed into the air. Behind them, the outline of a recessed door took shape, a rectangular iron panel with a rusted handle and an etched floral border typical of the early 20th century. Nora touched the design with a trembling finger. "This pattern. My grandmother used to draw something like this on the corners of her letters. Whitman women used it as a family mark." Ben examined the handle. "Then this might be Whitman construction." The thought tightened something deep in his chest, a sense that the past was reaching forward with deliberate hands. He pulled the handle gently. To his surprise, it opened with a low metallic sigh. Inside lay a small room, 5 feet deep, lined with wooden shelves buckled under the weight of age. And against the back wall sat the safe. It was squat and square, with ornate cast iron legs and a dial that should have locked it tight. Yet the door hung slightly ajar, as though someone had meant to return to it but never did. Ben glanced at Nora. "You ready?" She nodded, though her breath caught in her throat. He opened the safe. Past the dust and time-worn smell lay a neatly arranged stack of envelopes, bundles of paper tied with cotton string, and a wooden strongbox with brass corners dulled by age. The first bundle bore crisp stamps and military seals. War bonds dated 1904, corners still sharp despite their decades in hiding. Another packet contained stock certificates, their inked lettering elegant and stubbornly precise. Green and Whitman Lumber Company. Nora's breath broke into a tiny gasp. "That's my family," she whispered. "Green and Whitman was dissolved before I was born. My grandfather talked about the mill burning, but he never mentioned surviving shares." Ben unfolded a brittle document tucked underneath. A survey map, its ink faded but legible enough to show water lines, timber boundaries, and scribbled notations marking keeper's route along Honeysuckle Creek. Beneath it was a supplemental will, naming the estate's stewardship to whomever preserves the integrity of the creek for no fewer than 25 consecutive years. Nora covered her mouth. 25 years? That's a lifetime of protection. Ben's fingertips brushed another envelope tucked inside the strongbox. One yellowed, sealed only by dust. He opened it carefully. Inside was a letter never delivered, penned in neat cursive. "To the rightful steward of Honeysuckle Creek. If you hold this letter, then the conditions have been met. The shares and bonds enclosed are to fund the widow and orphan woodcutters' fee, but if the steward fails to protect the creek, ownership passes to the alternate shareholder, recorded under the Lang family registry." Ben froze. Lang. The name tasted bitter. Nora's expression tightened. "So, if the preservation was interrupted, the estate defaults to the Langs," Ben finished. She stepped back, hands trembling at her sides. "My family never knew. If we had, Maybe we could have prevented people like Philip Lang from circling this place, like carrion. Ben placed the letter back gently. We don't know yet whether the conditions were met. We need the creek records, she said. Historical conservation logs, water use permits, ranger reports, anything proving continuous stewardship. Before Ben could answer, the faint crack of a floorboard echoed above, the unmistakable sound of someone walking. Rex stiffened and growled. Ben exchanged a sharp look with Nora. Someone's in the house. Footsteps moved across the kitchen, slow and assessing. Ben turned off the flashlight. Stay quiet, he whispered. Let him pass. But the footsteps stopped directly above them, as though the intruder sensed the air cavity beneath the floor. Rex growled deeper. A muffled voice, male, smooth, annoyed, broke the silence. Hayes, you down there? We need to discuss the council vote. It was Philip Lang. Ben tensed. Nora clutched her hands to her chest. Philip's tone was falsely civil, but his presence here at this hour was no accident. Philip continued. I know what you found. Word travels fast when people forget their windows aren't as fogged as they think. Ben inhaled sharply. How does he know? Nora whispered. We didn't tell anyone. Another sound interrupted them, a metallic click, like a key sliding into a latch. Philip locked the back door. I'm willing to offer you a rather extravagant incentive, Hayes. Help me push this sale through, and I'll make sure you're rewarded in ways the council doesn't need to hear about. Ben felt anger climb his spine like heat. I won't betray this place, he whispered to Nora, or its history. The footsteps retreated. A door slammed. The engine of Philip's SUV roared to life and sped off into the wet night. Only when the sound faded did Ben exhale. Nora leaned against the wall, closing her eyes. Ben, he knows. If the Langs inherit everything because the preservation clause fails, he intends to force that outcome, Ben said grimly. He's not just playing politics, he's hunting. Rex nudged the safe again, as if urging them to understand the weight of what they had discovered. Ben looked at Nora. We need evidence. More than this. Something undeniable. Nora met his gaze, eyes bright with fear and fire. Then we start tomorrow, at first light. But Rex suddenly let out a sharp bark, not a warning, but a discovery. He pawed at the far wall of the chamber, nails scraping at a patch of stone mottled darker than the rest. Ben raised his flashlight again. There, beneath a smear of dust, was a second metal hinge, so small it nearly disappeared into the masonry. Nora whispered, Another door? Ben swallowed hard. No, a hidden panel. The house groaned overhead, settling as though listening. Rex barked a second time, more insistent. Ben reached out and touched the hinge, and the brick wall moved. Dawn crept in as a pale ribbon of silver stretched over the ridge, barely illuminating the soaked pines and the swollen creek winding restlessly behind Honeysuckle Creek House. Inside the mansion, Ben Hayes stood at the kitchen counter, staring at the hidden hinge Rex had uncovered only hours earlier. The brick wall's slight shift still lingered in his mind, as if the house had exhaled a secret too long held. Nora Whitman stood beside him, her expression thoughtful and clouded. Her damp hair, pulled back into a loose knot, had started to curl around her temples, giving her an unexpectedly youthful air despite the fatigue softening her eyes. We'll return to that panel, Ben murmured, fastening his coat. Right now, we need answers from the town hall records. Nora smoothed her cardigan, adjusting the strap of her canvas satchel, filled with historical papers she had gathered over the years. The Whitman archives at the library have some of the old maps, she said, and the ranger station keeps handwritten logs going back a century. Her voice cracked slightly, as if she still struggled with the revelation that her own family's legacy had been hidden in an underground safe. Rex trotted to the doorway, tail level, keen amber eyes shining with his usual readiness, watchful, loyal, and entirely certain that the day ahead would require him. They stepped out into the cool morning. The town of Briar Ridge was already murmuring with tension. The previous night's blackout at the mansion and Philip Lang's suspicious intrusion had left Ben uneasy. The air felt charged, threaded with rumors. By mid-morning, they reached the town center, where a cluster of residents already stood near the bulletin board, reading the latest notices. Ben recognized a few faces, some friendly, some wary. At the front of the crowd stood Marjorie Hull, a thin, sharp-featured woman in her mid-60s, with an angular face and tightly curled gray hair pinned in precise spirals. Her narrow mouth always seemed 2 seconds from pursing. Marjorie had lived in Briar Ridge all her life and ran the sewing supply shop with the precision of a military commander. She was known for her stern opinions and her fondness for gossip, disguised as civic concern. "There he is," Marjorie announced loudly the moment she spotted Ben. "The man trying to save that derelict fire trap, or renovate it for his own pockets. Hard to tell." Ben resisted the urge to sigh. "Good morning, Marjorie." "Morning?" she scoffed. "Not with that eyesore still standing." She jabbed a finger at a printed notice. "Philip says the place is unsafe. He says he warned you not to drag the town into liability lawsuits." Nora stepped forward, gentler but firm. "Philip is not a building inspector, Marjorie." "Well, the actual inspector is coming today," Marjorie announced triumphantly. "Philip called him." Her eyes gleamed with the satisfaction of someone who loved the sound of trouble for others. Ben held his voice steady. "We have nothing to hide," Marjorie sniffed dramatically. "We'll see." Nora touched Ben's sleeve, a quiet reminder not to engage. He nodded and followed her toward the town hall. Behind them, Rex gave one soft growl in Marjorie's direction, though not hostile, more like a judgment. Inside the hall, they descended into the archive basement. The scent of old paper washed over them as they examined brittle ledgers, yellowed maps, and handwritten yearbooks of conservation notes. Hours passed in steady labor until Nora gasped softly. "Ben, look." She had found a bundle of ranger journals tied with twine. Each log was written in the slanted hand of Ranger Thomas Avery, a sturdy, broad-chested man from the mid-20th century, whose photographs showed a deeply tanned face, square jaw, and thick dark mustache that curled slightly at the edges. He had died young after a logging accident, leaving his journals as a testament to a duty he once carried with solemn pride. His handwriting, though rough, was consistent across decades. Checked Honeysuckle Creek, waterline stable, no contaminants, stewardship intact. "Every year," Nora whispered, running her fingers down the pages, "he tracked the creek, every year, without interruption." "That's more than enough to satisfy the 25-year condition," Ben said. "And my family's share?" Nora stared at the ledger with something like awe and grief mingling behind her gaze. "It was never revoked." Before Ben could respond, Rex's ears snapped upward. He barked once, sharp, urgent. Ben stiffened. "That's his danger signal." A moment later, they heard shouts from outside the hall, panicked, rising. They rushed out to see chaos near the wooden footbridge, behind the shops. The creek had risen dramatically from the morning rain, swirling brown and fast beneath the bridge. A young boy, no more than 9, clung to the underside of the bridge rail, his legs dangling dangerously close to the current. His mother, Ellie Dawson, a petite brunette with a round freckled face and tear-streaked cheeks, screamed his name. Ellie worked part-time at the bakery. She was mild-mannered and soft-hearted, always quick to help others. Now her hands shook uncontrollably as she reached for her son. Rex didn't wait. The German Shepherd surged forward like a launched arrow. Ben sprinted after him, shouting, "Rex, go!" The dog leapt onto the slick bridge planks with flawless balance, nose to the boards, following the faint cries. A wave slammed against the posts, and the boy lost his grip with a terrified shriek. Rex dove under the rail, bracing his paws against the edge, and clamped onto the boy's jacket sleeve. The current tried to rip them both down the channel, but Rex held firm, muscles quivering with strain. Ben arrived seconds later, dropping to his knees and reaching under the rail to pull both dog and child upward, water drenching his sleeves. With one final heave, they were free. Ellie burst into sobs, clutching her son to her chest. Bystanders gathered, murmuring in shock and gratitude. Marjorie Hull, who had wandered over during the commotion, pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. That dog," she whispered. "He saved the boy." Nora knelt beside Rex, cupping his wet fur with trembling hands. "Good boy. You incredible boy." Rex panted proudly, tail sweeping the bridge. Already, phones were out. Photos snapped. Someone shouted, "Call the county paper!" Another person muttered, "That creek must be protected. Look how strong the current is. If we build a resort, runoff will make it worse." The tide of public sentiment had shifted, not fully, but noticeably. By afternoon, Ben and Nora returned to Honeysuckle Creek House, exhausted but buoyed by hope. Yet the sky overhead darkened quickly, the clouds thickening into a bruised wall rolling in from the west. "A storm," Ben said. "A big one." That night, it hit like a hammer. Wind lashed the ancient eaves and thunder cracked above the ridge. Water churned violently down the creek channel. Inside the mansion, the old timbers groaned as if waking from a long nightmare. Rex paced the hall, restless, nose lifted. He stopped suddenly near the back door and barked, a short, warning sound. Ben grabbed his flashlight. Nora followed, her cardigan wrapped tight. They stepped out onto the porch. The rain came sideways, blurring the yard in sheets of gray. Rex pulled them toward the slope beneath the hill, where a narrow service path led toward the abandoned workshop, once owned by the Green and Whitman mill. "What is he after?" Nora shouted over the storm. Ben didn't answer. His gut already knew. Rex sprinted ahead, claws digging into the muddy slope. When they reached the workshop, the smell hit them. Chemical, foul, unmistakable. Ben raised his flashlight. A rusted drainage pipe jutted from beneath the structure, spewing cloudy runoff directly toward the creek. "Oh no," he breathed. "Illegal discharge. Lang's people must have set this up." Suddenly, a figure moved behind them, shadowed, quick. A man, tall and thin, hood pulled low, carrying a crowbar. His posture was hunched with a twitchy tension, the kind that belonged to someone long accustomed to doing other men's dirty work. His face was narrow with sharp cheekbones and a patchy beard that failed to hide his jittery unease. This was no local citizen. This was hired muscle. He swung at the pipe as if trying to break it apart, destroy evidence. Ben shouted, "Stop!" The man whirled around, eyes wild. "Ain't nobody supposed to see this." He lunged. Rex exploded forward, teeth bared, and slammed into the man's leg, knocking him sideways. The crowbar clattered into the mud. The intruder scrambled up, but Rex snatched something from his belt, a dangling metal keyring, and tore it free. The bishop man bolted into the storm, vanishing into the dark trees. Ben crouched to Rex. Hanging from the dog's jaws was a single heavy key, engraved with a number. Nora held her breath. "The key to the waste valve," Ben said. "Proof." A bolt of lightning split the sky. Thunder roared, and in its echo, something shifted, deep inside the mansion behind them. A sound like a door, one that hadn't been opened in years. Rex turned sharply toward the house. Nora whispered, "Ben, something's inside." Morning broke with a trembling hush over Briar Ridge, as if the storm had taken something with it, some brittle layer of illusion now stripped clean. Mist curled low along the creek banks, rising in ghostly ribbons between the moss-dark trunks. Ben Hayes stood in front of the mirror, fastening his dark wool jacket, noting the faint bruise on his forearm from pulling the boy out of the water. He winced, but not from pain, more from knowing what today might cost the town and himself. Rex paced behind him, amber eyes alert, his thick black and tan coat slightly puffed from the chill. The German Shepherd had slept lightly, ears twitching toward any creak of the mansion. He still hadn't forgotten the sound they heard the previous night, the mysterious internal shift in the old house. Ben tried not to dwell on it. The town hearing came first. Downstairs, Nora Whitman waited beside the oak table, her expression a tight mask of determination. She wore a charcoal skirt and a knitted cardigan the color of old parchment, her hair pinned neatly, but with a few strands escaping, signs of worry she couldn't quite smooth away. In her hands she clutched the ranger journals, the maps, and the brittle supplemental deed they had discovered in the safe. Her fingers trembled slightly, betraying how deeply personal this had become. "You ready?" Ben asked. "I'll never be," she whispered. "But it doesn't matter. We have truth on our side." Rex barked once, as if confirming. They left Honeysuckle Creek House and drove toward the town hall, its white pillars stark against the gray sky. As they approached, a crowd had already formed, half curious, half bitterly divided. Old-timers from the senior lodge clustered near the steps, proudly waving hand-painted signs reading, "Protect the creek and honor our history." On the opposite side stood supporters of the proposed resort, including shop owners hoping for tourist money. A few held glossy renderings of what Philip Lang promised: a sprawling spa, a golf course, a luxury lodge. One of the men waved a design board a little too aggressively. Dennis Tully, a stout man in his late 50s, with a bulbous nose and thinning sandy hair. Dennis owned the hardware store and was known around town for his short temperament, molded by decades of financial strain after his wife's long illness. His frustrations had hardened him, so he clung to the resort dream with desperate conviction. Inside the hall, the atmosphere thickened. The local council sat at the long walnut table, their expressions a mixture of caution and unease. At the center was Judge Eleanor Briggs, a tall woman in her early 70s with sharp cheekbones, snow-white hair coiled in a bun, and a gaze that could slice through lies like a blade. She was admired for her firm fairness and feared equally by those who tried to manipulate the law. Philip Lang sat at a separate table, immaculately dressed in a slate blue suit with a silver tie. His posture was stiff, his jaw clenched. The storm bruises beneath his eyes suggested a night without sleep, and perhaps fear that his empire might finally crack. Beside him sat his attorney Marcus Ellery, a thin man in his early 40s with bony fingers, pale skin, and small dark eyes that seemed to blink too slowly. His expression was always unreadable, a habit partly formed after years defending corporate clients whose guilt he privately acknowledged but never publicly conceded. Ben and Nora took their seats. Rex lay at Ben's feet, quietly alert. Judge Briggs tapped her gavel. "We are here regarding the future of Honeysuckle Creek House, the surrounding watershed, and any proposed development. Mr. Lang has raised safety concerns. Mr. Hayes has submitted allegations of environmental misconduct. We will hear all sides." The hearing began with the building inspector's report, predictable, slightly slanted, clearly influenced by Philip. But then came the turning tide. Ben rose. "Your Honor, we found evidence of intentional discharge of industrial runoff into the creek. We recovered a key belonging to the waste valve." He set the keyring gently on the table. Philip stiffened. Ben continued. "We also have video documentation of the illegal pipe. The perpetrator attempted to destroy the evidence during the storm." Gasps issued from the crowd. Marjorie Hull's rigid posture softened noticeably. Even Dennis Tully looked uneasy. Judge Briggs turned to Philip. "Mr. Lang, do you deny the existence of this pipe?" Philip's jaw flexed. "It was installed before I purchased the mill. I had no knowledge of it." His answer quivered on the air, neither confident nor convincing. Nora stood next. Her voice, though quiet, carried the weight of lineage. "Your Honor, I respectfully submit these." She placed the ranger journals, folded maps, and the supplemental deed on the table. These documents show continuous conservation of Honeysuckle Creek by multiple generations of caretakers. The conditions set by the original trust, established by the Green and Whitman families, have been met. And therefore, a new figure stepped forward, Attorney Howard Cresswell, the trust's legal representative. He was a large man in his late 60s, with wide shoulders, gray hair brushed back neatly, and a deeply lined face that broadcast honesty. A widower and former public defender, he had a reputation for compassion, paired with an unbreakable moral spine. He adjusted his glasses. "Your Honor, the trust has indeed matured, accounting for investment growth, reinvestment of dividends, and the wartime bonds found in the safe. The current value exceeds $30 million. Under its provisions, the property and funds must be administered by a board of stewards charged with protecting the creek and supporting the families of fallen mill workers." The hall murmured, surprise, awe, disbelief. Cresswell continued, "Per the supplemental deed, discovered inside the safe, the individuals who uncovered the materials and who currently act as guardians of the property are eligible to serve on this board." His eyes settled on Ben and Nora. That would be Mr. Hayes, Ms. Whitman, and a designated elder from the community. Nora's breath caught. Ben's heart thudded once, hard. But Howard Cresswell wasn't done. "And there is an additional clause, one previously hidden in the interior lining of the safe." He held up a thin sheet of yellowing paper. "It specifies that if any stakeholder is found complicit in environmental contamination of Honeysuckle Creek, all claims, including contingency shares, are immediately revoked and subject to penalties." Judge Briggs narrowed her gaze. "Mr. Cresswell, are you suggesting that the Lang family's secondary claim is voided?" "Not suggesting, Your Honor," he replied calmly. "Confirming." A stunned stillness swept the room. Philip surged to his feet. "This is nonsense. My family, this town, relies on that investment." "The town will still benefit," Cresswell said, "but your family will not reap the profits of a trust whose conditions your own actions violated." Philip's face blanched, then flushed red. Judge Briggs lifted her gavel. "Order." Ben watched the powerful man crumble in silent, furious defeat. For the first time, the truth had taken the upper hand. When the gavel finally fell again, the ruling was clear. Honeysuckle Creek House was officially recognized as a protected heritage property under the Stewardship Trust. Philip Lang's development permit was suspended pending state investigation. The Lang family's claim was annulled. Outside the courthouse, people gathered around Ben and Nora, cheering, clapping, thanking Rex most of all. The dog sat proudly, accepting pats with patient dignity, tail sweeping in slow arcs. Marjorie Hull dabbed her eyes dramatically. "I was wrong about you, Mr. Hayes," she sniffed. "And your dog. Especially your dog." Ben chuckled softly. Nora stepped closer, her voice low, warm. "Ben, what you did today, it mattered. Not just for the house or the creek, but for the people whose stories were nearly erased." He looked at her, really looked, at the quiet strength in her hazel eyes, the grief that had shaped her, the courage that now glowed beneath the surface. Something shifted between them, subtle as the creek's current, but undeniable. Before he could speak, Rex lifted his head sharply and barked toward the distant mansion, his body suddenly alert. Ben froze. Nora whispered, "There it is again. That sound." The wind carried a faint echo, like an old latch shifting, from somewhere inside Honeysuckle Creek House. Ben exhaled, uneasy. That house isn't done speaking. Late autumn sunlight drifted across Briar Ridge like a warm lantern, softening the last gold leaves clinging to the maples and laying a gentle glow over the newly restored clearing beneath the creek. Honeysuckle Creek House stood dignified at the center of the ridge, its timbers repaired, windows polished, and porch rails gleaming with fresh oil. But the real pride of the day stood just downhill, nestled close enough to hear the water, the Honeysuckle Community Center. Ben Hayes paused near the entrance arch, hands tucked in the pockets of his dark wool jacket, watching townspeople gather in steady waves. Someone had strung garlands of late chrysanthemums along the walkway, fiery orange, pale gold, and rust red. Rex trotted at Ben's side, tail wagging at every familiar face. The dog seemed almost smug, as though he understood the center's existence owed more to his instincts than anyone else's. At the far end of the lawn, Nora Whitman stood greeting volunteers. She wore a soft blue shawl over a burgundy dress, her silver light hair pinned loosely and warmed by the afternoon glow. Her smile today was both brighter and deeper, no longer burdened by the uncertainty that had shadowed her in past months. Ben approached slowly, taking a moment simply to watch her. She was speaking to Harriet Coleman, a compact woman in her 70s with salt-white curls, rosy cheeks, and lively brown eyes. Harriet had been chosen as the senior representative on the stewardship board, widowed early in life, and known for her unshakable optimism. Despite arthritis clouding her mobility, she moved with a brisk determination born from decades of refusing to let hardship define her. When Harriet spotted Ben, she waved a mittened hand. "Well, look who finally showed up. The man of the hour and his four-legged deputy," Ben laughed. "Rex prefers the term chief inspector." Rex barked once, as if in agreement, and Harriet bent to pat his flank. "He earned it." Nora turned toward Ben, her smile shifting into something softer. "They're waiting for us inside." The interior of the new center was bright and warm, walls paneled with reclaimed lumber from the old mill. A reading corner, furnished with plush chairs and tall shelves, faced a window where the creek shimmered through the trees. A community kitchen gleamed at the opposite end, copper pots hanging neatly above a spotless counter. Near the hallway stood a bulletin board bearing a sign, "Widows and Orphans Lumber Scholarship. Applications open." Underneath, several envelopes already waited. Ben felt an unexpected surge of emotion. "It's beautiful," he murmured. "It's the town's," Nora replied. "And yours, and his." She nodded at Rex, who was now investigating a plate of cookies some volunteer had foolishly left within nose reach. The ceremony began as the townspeople filled the main hall. Children waved miniature flags decorated with painted pines. Seniors clapped, slowly in rhythm to the folk trio playing near the fireplace. Ben stepped behind the podium and waited for quiet. "When I first walked into Honeysuckle Creek House," he began, "I thought I was evaluating a listing, but I wasn't. I was being evaluated by the house, by its history, by the creek that runs beside it. I've sold hundreds of homes in my career, but this is the first place that ever felt alive." He glanced toward Nora. "A place that breathes." Nora's cheeks colored faintly. He continued, voice steady. "We stand here today because generations cared for the land before us, because courage outlives fear, because a community's future is shaped not by ambition, but by stewardship and kindness." The applause rose warm and unhurried, like a tide returning home. After the speeches, people spilled outside to enjoy the last mild afternoon before winter claimed the ridge. Ben found Nora near the fieldstone wall overlooking the creek. She held a small envelope in her hand. "This is for you," she said. Inside was a folded card. On the cover was a watercolor sketch of Honeysuckle Creek House, its windows glowing, a dog silhouette framed in the doorway. Inside, in her neat script, were 4 lines of playful, gentle verse. "A house is just timber until hearts choose to stay. A creek is just water until someone listens its way. A life drifts in circles until steadied by grace. And love finds its footing in the quietest place." Ben read it twice, throat tightening. "Nora, this is..." Her eyes met his. "Everything we went through, it healed something in me I didn't realize was still broken." He breathed out slowly, the tension of long years lifting. "I think it healed something in me, too." Their hands touched, tentative at first, then more certain. Rex barked approvingly and bounded ahead toward the creek path, glancing back as if to urge them forward. They followed him, walking side by side as leaves spiraled down and the water hummed against river stones. It felt like the start of something steady, gentle, meant to last. Winter arrived early. Frost painted the eaves of Honeysuckle Creek House with delicate lace, and logs crackled in the hearth while dusk settled over the valley like a wool blanket. The Stewardship Trust, now fully active, began sending monthly assistance checks to long-forgotten widows of mill workers. At the senior lodge, laughter returned to the evenings as a new mobile health bus, funded by the trust, parked outside each Saturday morning. Philip Lang's fate was decided a few weeks after the hearing. A state investigation confirmed the illegal discharge, resulting in a heavy fine and a mandated decade-long ecological restoration program funded entirely by the Lang estate. The once formidable mogul appeared smaller now, leaning heavily on a cane, the stress carving hollows beneath his stern eyes. Justice, though slow, had arrived. A water monitoring station was built beside the footbridge, the very spot where Rex had saved the boy. Each morning, townspeople chuckled seeing the German Shepherd trot up, sniff the air around the instrument box, and sit as if certifying its readings. Inside the house, warmth blossomed. Nora spent many evenings there, helping Ben organize historic documents for public display. She brought cocoa in a thermos, always with extra marshmallows for Rex, who now claimed the rug by the fireplace as his kingdom. One evening, snowflakes drifted outside the windows, catching moonlight in shimmering threads. Ben hung a small wooden sign beside the front steps, letters carved neatly, "Dogs and books, welcome." Nora set 2 steaming mugs on the table. Rex lifted his head and thumped his tail once against the floorboards. Outside, the creek gleamed beneath a thin shell of ice. Inside, firelight danced across the walls, and a home, real, hard-earned, quietly miraculous, had finally taken shape. A house built not from timber alone, but from loyalty, justice, and a love that had waited patiently for its second season. In the quiet hush of winter settling over Honeysuckle Creek, one truth rises gently above the rest. Sometimes the blessings we wait for arrive not in thunder or miracles carved across the sky, but in steady footsteps on an old wooden porch, in a dog who listens to the silence better than any of us, and in neighbors who choose compassion when the world expects indifference. Ben and Nora didn't just restore a forgotten house. They reminded an entire town that God's grace often works through everyday acts of courage, kindness, and loyalty. And perhaps that is the real legacy buried beneath the dust and the storms. That no matter how lost a place or a heart may seem, the Lord has a way of guiding us home, one faithful step at a time. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to share it so others may feel the same warmth. Leave a comment with your own stories of faith, of second chances, or of the small miracles you've witnessed in your own life. And if you'd like to journey with us through more tales of hope, healing, and God's quiet wonders, remember to subscribe. May the Lord bless you, keep you, and light your path, today and always.